Story 1. I had significant anxiety around adults as a child, so whenever someone approached me to talk, I would almost immediately have an accident. Story 2. I saw Disney's Tarzan when I was about 3 years old and became obsessed. I climbed on the living room curtains as if they were my vines and ended up cracking my head pretty badly. I don't remember much about it except the pain of being stitched in my head. It's a core memory I have. I was forbidden to watch Peter Pan until I was much older in case I jumped from the window. Story 3. In 6th grade, during a Remembrance Day ceremony, in the middle of the moment of silence, my stomach had had enough, and I accidentally let out one of the biggest, longest farts of my life. All the kids laughed. I got into big trouble as everyone thought it was intentional, but it was not. Story 4. When I was about 6 or 7, I found a bag of psychedelic mushrooms in my hippie uncle's girlfriend's coat pocket. Unaware of what they were, I ate a handful, and later my mom said she entered the living room and found me sitting with my face pressed against the laptop, staring at the screensaver and saying, "Wow, so pretty." She took me to the hospital, and the entire experience was a complete nightmare. Story 5. I accidentally fed my sister's goldfish a whole sleeve of saltine crackers because I thought it looked hungry. Turns out fish can explode. Story 6. I picked the neighbor's flowers to give to my mom. I thought all flowers grew naturally wherever and that they were free for everyone to pick. I was very young. Story 7. My sister, friends, and I wanted to surprise our parents. What would make them happy? A freshly cleaned car, of course. How do you clean a car? It's simple. You grab a big bottle of dish cleaner and all the brushes and sponges you can find, sneak out of the house, and then get to work. Apparently, my parents found us 10 minutes later, in our underwear, climbing all over the somewhat new car, smearing dish soap everywhere we could reach, and then sliding down the soaked windshield. Story 8, here we go. When I was in kindergarten, my best friend came to school with a ring that she said belonged to her great-grandmother. Her mom let her wear it to school. I begged her all day to let me wear it, and she did. For some reason, I was sitting at the top of the slide and thought, I wonder what sound it would make when I slid it down. So I popped it off my finger and slid it down the slide. It was lost. We searched during the entire recess. The teachers looked, and after taking everyone else inside, my friend and one helper continued to search for several more minutes. Apparently, her mom drove to the playground that night to look for it. It was lost forever. I still feel guilty about that. As a mom, I would never send an heirloom to school with my 5 to 6-year-old. Story 9. When I was 7, there was a small bag of powder on top of my aunt's fish tank. I thought it was special food since they had fancy, expensive fish, so I put it in. It was toxic and all 200 fish died. I still feel terrible. Story 10. I was 2 or 3 years old when I dropped a heavy glass ashtray out of the small ventilation window. I have no clue why I did it, and my mom and grandmother said it was so heavy I shouldn't have been able to lift it so high, let alone wiggle it through the small opening. It was the 9th floor and the drop was directly onto the sidewalk. Luckily, there was no one below. Otherwise, it would have been a deadly hit. Story 11. My brother, some friends, and I started a forest fire that burned a square mile. Luckily, it was mostly cranberry bogs. We had broken into the laundromat's quarter machine and used all the change to buy charcoal snakes that expand when you light them. We must have had 20 or 30 cases of them. 7-year-old me was pretty freaked out when we found out that the fires we thought we had put out really weren't. Story 12. According to my sister, I threw a brick at her. I remember no such thing, which is strange because it should be the other way around since she claims it was a headshot. Story 13. I put a glass thermometer in a baked potato, and it shattered. I was too afraid to tell my mom I broke it, so I tried to eat around it. Halfway through dinner, she asked where it was and got really mad. Imagine that. Story 14. I ate a tomato that had pesticide on it. My mother reacted strongly and called poison control. Thankfully, I survived. Story 15. I was 4 when I met my cousin. They told me she practiced karate, so I suggested we try karate together and accidentally punched her square in the nose. That was a really inconsiderate move. I had completely forgotten about it until now. Story 16. For context, I was living in northern New Hampshire. We flew to Kentucky to see my grandmother. I was about 3 and my sister was 7. We were at the Louisville airport elevator with my sister, my mother, a man we didn't know, and me. As the door closed, I asked my mom why the man had blue skin. He had very dark skin, which I had not seen in northern New Hampshire. My mom was mortified. The man was very nice and explained that people come in many different shades, but inside we are all the same. Story 17. I accidentally hit my 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Kincaid, in the head with an aluminum bat. She sustained a concussion. We were playing baseball during physical education outside, and after hitting the ball, I tossed the bat without noticing that she was sitting on the half row of stairs behind me. I broke her glasses. It was a total accident. Story 18. I accidentally set fire to the living room rug when I was 5 and left home alone. My brothers were supposed to be watching me, but they decided to go fishing instead. I stomped the fire out, but it left a horrible burn on the shag carpeting from the 1970s. Story 19. My neighbor convinced me to lock her mother out of the house while her baby brother was inside. My mom was so mad. Story 20. I have always known I was adopted. When I was about 5, I did not want to do something my grandma was asking me to do. I exclaimed, "You're not even my real grandma." The hurt I caused with those careless words was immense. Story 21. I took a mini photo album from a store when I was 4. My mom was buying something when I saw a sign on the albums that said, "Free with purchase." I was taken back inside after my mother explained that you had to purchase photo processing and not just any purchase. I had only read the big letters. Story 22. One time I told my grandma that my mom doesn't like to come to her house because it smells like smoke. I had no idea I shouldn't just blurt out the truth all the time. Story 23. When I was 3, I tried to drive the family car. I put it into neutral, and it rolled down the driveway and up against the side of the house. In a panic, I managed to get it back into park. Even if I had known about the brakes, I wouldn't have been able to reach them. One time, when I was in my 30s, I said to my parents, "Did you know that I tried to drive the car once when I was little?" They both groaned and said, "We know. We found the car pushed up against the house." Story 24. I was a pretty good kid. The only thing I can think of is when I was about 13 or 14, I started talking to a girl online, and we lived in the same state. We exchanged phone numbers, and I talked to her for about 6 hours straight. What I didn't know was that even if you're in the same state, it counted as a long-distance call. So I ended up with a phone bill over $500 that day. My mom was nice about it, though. She mostly just laughed, but I'm sure it was the kind of pained laugh you give when you lose a whole paycheck. I never really got in trouble as a kid, so she just told me not to do it again, explained why, and that was that. Story 25. I took the neighbor's spare key from under their welcome mat, and they ended up stuck outside in the cold for hours. This was before mobile phones. Story 26. Not sure about unknowingly, but we used to blow up anthills with firecrackers in the lot across the street. It was right next to a hospital, and the nurses would come out and yell at us to stop. It never occurred to us that sudden explosions might affect the health of the patients. However, it did occur to us that it was something we weren't supposed to do. Story 27. Our cat was having kittens in the back bathroom when I was about 5 years old. I found her and picked up the first little kitten. I used a warm washcloth to clean it up and carried it off to show my mom, telling her that Rocky was having babies. When my mom saw me walk by holding this tiny, squirming creature, she freaked out and yelled at me. That scared me, and when I jumped, I accidentally threw the kitten. When Mom realized what it was, she started to yell at me again for dropping it, but before she could really get going, I was already carefully scooping it up again, crying because I thought I had killed it. This was the only time in my childhood that she backed down from yelling at me, even though I was not at fault. My little brother was her favorite, and everything was my fault. The kitten ended up being okay. I named it White Socks because it was orange with white legs. Story 28. My mom likes to tell stories about how I would ride my tricycle up and down the street, playfully roughhouse with the neighbor kids, and take their toys as I rode away. Story 29. When I was 4 or 5 years old, I stuck an actual key into a couch while pretending to drive a bus at my daycare. I shoved it into the fabric and left a hole. It turned out to be a brand new couch, and the owner was very angry. She put soap in my mouth, and I can still taste that. Story 30. I was in 5th or 6th grade at a friend's birthday party and repeated my friend's parents' comments about their family friend. I guess they were alcoholics and spent all their money on that. They bought a cheap gift from a dollar store and mentioned that maybe if he didn't waste his money on drugs, he could get an actual gift. I repeated this to the dad. He became very angry and threatened me, and I got scared and called my mom. I never saw them again. Story 31. My sister and I selected a movie on a television at a hotel without realizing we would incur charges for it. We faced significant consequences. Honestly, there are probably worse things, but that experience has always stuck with me. Story 32. I kept a bucket of mud and slugs in a cupboard in our kitchen because I wanted them as pets, but the mud dried out and they died. I felt so bad. Story 33. I heard many rap songs on the radio in 1st grade, so I wrote the offensive word on the basement stairwell wall. Fortunately, I misspelled it. Story 34. On vacation, we visited a county or state fair. While looking at the livestock, I saw the bulls and yelled, "Daddy, what's that between its legs?" I had no idea what a testicle was or what it looked like. My dad said all the kids who raised them just laughed. Story 35. I was enamored with blowing out candles. I had to be held back at birthday parties to avoid overshadowing the celebrant as they blew out their own candles. More troublingly, I extinguished a couple of church prayer candles. This was before I understood they were lit for prayer intentions, and I still cringe about it. Story 36. In 1st grade, my class was studying the butterfly cycle. After class, I went to the playground and found a strip of colorful, balloon-like packets. They were slightly melted, but I thought they were a nectar concoction meant for butterflies to drink. I didn't dare to open it at the time because I planned to save it for when the cocoons we had in the classroom hatched, so the butterflies could drink after being newly reborn. However, I was confused about why each packet of nectar had a circular rim that resembled a balloon. Not knowing what to do, I brought it home and decided to figure it out later or take it to class the next day to ask my teacher. Once I got home, my dad stumbled upon it and loudly announced that he would be tossing it out. When I asked why, he explained that it was very unsanitary. I assumed he was referring to the fact that I found it on the ground and that the melted part might be toxic. It was disappointing, but since I couldn't figure out what it was, I wasn't too concerned about it being thrown out. I randomly thought about it again one day in 6th grade. I brought home a strip of mushy wrappers that had melted in the sun, which had been left on a playground for some reason. I was just one step away from bringing that to our weekly Friday show and tell too. Story 37. I used a racial slur as a child because I did not realize it was offensive. I believed it was just another word for male genitalia. For clarification, I heard this term from other children at school, not from my family. Story 38. I had high-quality plastic dinosaurs that I loved. My 2nd grade teacher had some of the same ones, but she also had different dinosaurs that I didn't own. One day after school, I took them and put them in my bag to take home. 2 to 3 years later, guilt caught up with me, so I told my grandmother about what I had done. We decided to donate all my dinosaurs to the school library since the 2nd grade teacher had quit 2 years earlier, and we couldn't find her. After donating them, I felt much better, and they became part of a school exhibit. I still think about this today, and I am 33 years old. Story 39. Mom, Dad, look at the rainbows I created. I had a lot of fun with magnets and our television. It is completely destroyed. Story 40. In kindergarten, my school had a peanut-free table for children with peanut butter allergies. However, my clever 5-year-old self misunderstood it and thought that people who ate peanut butter had to sit at that table. So, I sat there eating peanut butter next to all the children who were allergic to it without realizing my mistake. Fortunately, nothing bad happened, but I felt guilty about it for years. Story 41. smeared lightning bugs on the pavement to write my name in glowing letters. As someone who has always loved bugs and was very sensitive about animals getting hurt, I have no idea how I didn't understand I was harming them. It's been over 35 years, and I still feel terrible when I think about it. Story 42. Friends of mine took a cow from the pasture and started walking it down the street. We lived in the new suburbs being built south of the farms. I was scared to take a turn while walking it, but finally did, and wouldn't you know it, that's when the police came. Story 43. I placed pieces of a jigsaw puzzle into the DVD player, thinking it would play the puzzle piece. Unfortunately, it did not work and instead broke the DVD player. Who knows, maybe I was onto something good there. Story 44. Over at a friend's house, the two of us took a bottle of milk of magnesia tablets. Her mom gave us Ipecac and waited for us to vomit it up. Story 45. When I was 9, all I knew was that inhaling the large balloons would make me sing like Mariah Carey. I inhaled 2 balloons, and when my mother found me, she started crying because I was dizzy. At least I sang like Mariah Carey. Story 46. My grandmother used to take us cousins to Mr. Getty's Pizza. First, we would go to the bank next door to the restaurant to get suckers and quarters for the arcade. Right after I had turned 5, I recall my grandmother telling the cashier, "She's 3. I was outraged. "No, I'm not. I'm 5. My grandmother told me afterward that she knew I was 5, but she said I was 3 to get a cheaper price or to get me in free. I felt awful about it because I was ashamed that I made my grandmother spend more money on me. Story 47. My friends and I were having a rock throwing contest, but we didn't realize we were throwing the rocks into someone's backyard. They went to our school and caught us red-handed. We were having innocent fun at the expense of someone's home. Story 48. I took a red crayon to the back of the minister's wife's white couch. I figured since it was the back of the couch facing the window, nobody would notice. My mom was mortified, but she still says my sister got into the most trouble as a kid. Story 49. I had long curtains instead of closet doors, and I played a fun game where I tied a curtain around my neck, ran full speed until I ran out of slack, and then jumped in the air to swing backward. I continued until I knocked the wind out of myself. Story 50. I escaped as a toddler and was found next door in the neighbor's open garage drinking turpentine. I was rushed to the hospital, but I'm okay, I think. Story 51. My friend, who was diabetic, made me feel bad because I was the lookout while she stole snacks from the older classrooms. Since she got an early lunch, we would be the first ones out. I still feel guilty. I was only 8 at the time. Story 52. I had proof, even if circumstantial. I could have taken pictures to match the car's license plates, but I didn't. A teacher, my favorite teacher, was involved with a student. We were in 8th grade, and his car had no reason to be parked in front of her house. She lived 2 blocks from me and was always flirting with him in class. It was obvious something was going on. I said nothing because I didn't want him to get fired. I didn't think the pictures would be enough. This was long before digital cameras. Walgreens developed the film, so there were no accurate dates. He went on to do the same to other girls after we went to high school. Eventually, one of them reported him. One day, I received a letter from him. How he got my address, I don't know. He wrote to tell me he hoped I would be a famous writer someday, as I was always writing stories, and that he would be able to say he knew me when. He mentioned he was leaving the state to teach elsewhere and advised that if I heard anything about it, to know he was leaving for personal reasons. He didn't realize that I had always known. There was no forwarding address. I haven't written much since. Story 53. I watched someone rob a house and I think they hurt the people inside before leaving from my babysitter's front porch. I didn't really do anything about it because the first person I told brushed it off, so I did too. I think about it a lot. Story 54. I almost broke into what I thought was an abandoned house at age 12. But it was actually a winterized beach house. Television shows in the 1990s often made abandoned houses seem more common than they actually are. Story 55. 3 years old in a fine art museum, I ran over to a massive Rembrandt and touched it with both hands. I always had a passion for art, I suppose. Story 56. I unintentionally pitted my divorced parents against each other by expressing my thoughts without considering the consequences. To be fair, they both had a significant impact on me, often putting me in the middle and using me as a weapon. Story 57. I bullied a guy the same age as me because I was also bullied by my current friends. They teased me for being sensitive, which affected my emotions. Then there was this guy, let's call him AJ, who seemed vulnerable, and that made me feel like I could bully him. My friends have changed, at least some of them, though some still hold those tendencies. Story 58. When I was around 9, I once asked some relatives when they were going to have a child so I could have a cousin. Many years later, I learned that they had been struggling with fertility for a long time. I still feel incredibly bad about this. Story 59. I asked my mom loudly why black people and white people couldn't use the same hair products in the middle of a Walmart. I received a response along the lines of God wanted everyone to have different hair. Since then, I have learned a lot about how that belief could potentially damage someone's hair. Story 60. I was very curious about female anatomy, so I was probably concerned about sexual assault. I am glad someone took the time to explain body parts and personal privacy to me. Story 61. I used to play doctor with neighbor girls when I was 5 or 6. I know kids are curious, and this behavior is quite common, but it still feels wrong when I look back at it. At the time, I understood it was inappropriate, so it was done out of sight of adults. I did get caught by my brother once, and they used to threaten to tell my dad, who was physically abusive to us. Eventually, they did tell him, and I was whipped with a belt so severely that I had welts. I had a difficult childhood. Story 62. I dunked a cat in red paint because it needed a bath. I was about 3 years old at the time, and the poor cat had a reddish tint for a while afterwards. Story 63. Where to start? I think the worst was when I was around 4 to 7 years old. I recall unscrewing light bulbs from table lamps while the lamp was on and then sticking my fingers in the lamp socket. I don't remember feeling a shock, but I do remember dark blue marks on my fingers from poking the socket. I also touched one of those cigarette lighters that used to be in old cars. I was curious and reckless. Story 64. I am grateful that this app allows for anonymity. I experienced sexual abuse as a child, which led to an early oversexualization and hypersexuality that impacted my behavior randomly. At times, I would hump objects or move my legs in ways that felt good in public due to the abuse. Family members, such as uncles and cousins, would make fun of me. However, when the truth emerged later in my life, they were all heartbroken and saddened. Additionally, I frequently wet the bed and soiled myself on occasion. Story 65. At 8 years old, I fell out of a tree in front of my strict parents while trying to see my sister's friend in the second-story shower. I didn't even get to see her. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.